I'm Gary Sutton. WSBA News Time is 7:10.
He said the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
That was Joe Biden with what may have been an unfortunate statement for him a couple days ago, but so far no apology, and no apology from anybody around him. And I want to talk a little bit more about that this morning, where that stands in terms of how it affects people. Is it too dirty in a race? Royalyn Reed is a cultural sensitivity expert, and she joins us this morning on New York's Morning News. Good morning, Royalyn. How are you?
Hi, fine, and you?
Royalyn, I'm doing great. A lot of people are making a lot about what the vice president said a couple days ago. Is it much ado about nothing, or should there be some attention paid to this statement?
Well, you know, Gary, we have to look at that, because if we're talking about it and when you look at the words, whether it's unshackled, unchained, or whatever, that's still an issue here in our country, you know, with slavery and just with groups that runs deep. So we do have to be careful about the words we use in the selection.
Are we at a point today in our country where we become too, I don't want to say, I know you're in the sensitivity business, but we become too sensitive to how we talk, or must we keep it kind of in a cultural realm when we go out there and we say statements, especially when we're in the public arena?
Well, I think you're right. You make an important point. We have to look at it both ways. We do have to be careful and show that we are sensitive. However, none of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We're going to say things. So when you say something you don't mean, hey, you know, let's get it right. Let's get it right. Say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Let's correct it. So it goes both ways. But we have to look at it too. We have to also be forgiving and really look at someone's motives and stick to the points as well of what's really important if we make a faux pas.
You know, I'm one of those guys that kind of lets this kind of stuff normally go by, and I would let this go by again. To me, you know, Joe Biden is a guy who is, shall we say, gaffe prone. He's got a history of doing that. But by the same token, the way you inflect your words, the way you say your words, when you say y'all are going to be back in chains, that's not something Joe Biden would normally say. The guy's from Delaware, for heaven's sakes, and born up in Pennsylvania. And so when he inserted that part, that kind of got to me. He's talking to a group that was at least 50% African American, and he put that back in there like, I'm one of you guys. You know, I just found it distasteful. What is it that's bothering me so, and I guess maybe bothers other people in the country about that?
Gary, I think you make a very good point, because it's one thing to, you know, make a mistake with your words,
sure,
to get in there. And I think everyone feels that way when someone's trying to be in an in-group, or you feel like you're trying to be cool. But there's no doubt that's definitely the way it was perceived. You know, say it the way you normally talk, or from your perspective versus something else. And so that seems to be almost a bigger issue than the words that were said to a lot of the people that were offended.
You know, Royalyn, we look at today the amount of words that we get hit with, and with the computers and with 24/7 news and everything's out there all the time. I mean, you have got to really have an idea of how you are seen by, you know, the country out there, right? I mean, that's something where maybe, you know, 30, 40 years ago, not so much, but now, moment to moment during the day, you're making news by what you say. And so your sensitivity to so many different groups in this country, and particularly to all Americans, is going to be really important.
Well, that is a good point. And of course, our company, we work with different agencies, different groups around the nation in this area. The point doesn't change. People are still people. You have to go back to the basics. Remember who you're trying to communicate with and what you're trying to connect and say. So just make sure that you are connecting with the person from the viewpoint that you would like to receive it in, or they would like to hear it in, or what they're going to hear. So the same basic principles don't change. As you mentioned, media is out there a lot more. We're getting information, but if we all work and remember the basics in terms of cultural sensitivity, diversity, which it just means that there are differences. And especially if you're out there and with the communication, you're going to reach a larger audience. So, but if we remember the basics, go back to the basics that, you know, we cover and you learn in training. And if you haven't had training, just go back and read or find a way to.
Right.
Just remember, common sense, basic things.
Yeah, common sense, though, is that sense which is most times most uncommon. So we'll come back and talk a little bit about that. Should Joe Biden apologize? We'll ask Royalyn that question at 7:20. And does he need a crash course in racial sensitivity? We'll ask that question as well of Royalyn Reed, who's a cultural sensitivity expert. here on York's Morning News. WSBA News Time 7:15. WSBA News Time is 7:21. Back with cultural sensitivity expert Royland Reed. Royland, people are not laying this whole Biden statement down right now and not ready to forget it. I think they feel like it was kind of a political stunt, was done on purpose, and the president hasn't come out and apologized for it. Everybody's kind of stood by this guy. And yet there is a part of us in this country, too. It says if Paul Ryan, for example, were to have said this, he'd be getting steamrolled right now. Why is it that we can be sensitive on one side but not sensitive on another side here in this country? It's all just plain politics?
Well, unfortunately, Gary, we do see a lot of that going on because if something like that happens within any of us, whether you're at home with your family or coworkers, if you make a mistake, whether it's something like this or anything, you say, hey, you know what, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry if I offended you or hurt your feelings. But you know what? This is what I really meant. This is where we're going. And you get focused back on the issue. But we see a lot of other things mixed in there as well right now.
I do want to ask you, should Joe Biden say I'm sorry right here? Would that give him a little bit more of a human look here? And does he need some cultural sensitivity training? I know he's had some things to say before about walking into a 7-Eleven and you have to be able to speak Indian there, and President Obama being, a bright African-American and well-spoken and so forth. Does this guy need a little sensitivity training?
Well, it just depends on that, because some of the things he's talking about are real.
Sure.
Children do that all the time. It's obvious that Obama is a fair-skinned African-American. Mm-hmm. So to say that, is that an issue? So we just have to really look at how sensitive we really are, and are we making descriptions, or are we really talking derogatorily, or saying something that has a deep wound with someone, describing a fact and the way you handle something. Now, one thing too, even if you look at the slavery issue, a lot of times it's something we need to talk about, but normally you see it talked about in history. But when you just throw it out in a speech, or kind of like, by the way, that's when a lot of times people feel like, if that's sensitive to me, you're not handling or recognizing it as a sensitive issue.
Right.
So that could be more of the issue, more so than the words.
Yeah, final question for you here. We're in a situation right now where a lot of people are saying we're getting too culturally sensitive in this country, that you have to weigh every word you speak anymore, even when you don't have bad intentions to what you're saying. What advice would you give to people in that regard?
Gary, I think it goes both ways. We have to be at a point that we think on one side to be considerate, just using the word considerate, when we interact with anyone. But the one receiving it also needs to be open-minded and considerate if someone makes a mistake or just doesn't say anything perfectly, to say, you know what, I understand, I forgive, or hey, you didn't mean that. Let's go on to the next thing. So it's a two-way street. So if we get to that point, it'll work a lot better for all of us.
So don't sit there waiting to be affronted or assaulted or insulted maybe. Rather, roll with the punches and figure out maybe the person didn't have any bad intentions at all. They just were saying what they were saying.
And it goes both ways. You have to look at it. Sometimes people mean something and sometimes they don't. But we just have to weigh it out. Let's have the dialogue and look at what it really means and stay focused on the issues. More so is, what do we all want to achieve? Because both sides of communication, whether it's in this instance or if it's a work or home issue with a spouse, a child, is all the same thing.
Unfortunately, when politics gets into it, it seems to get tinged a lot more. Royland, great having you on the show this morning. Thank you so much for your help.
Thanks, Gary.
You have a great day. Take care. Royland Reed live this morning from Dallas, Texas, here on York's Morning News.